Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar. We'll be looking at GDPR from the perspective of Team IT this afternoon. So GDPR is a big topic that a lot of our customers have shown interest in, and we have worked with a couple of our partners, done some research ourselves, and tailored the information, a lot of information that we've gathered to Team IT effectively. And where your focus should be, we will be looking at some of the technology that can help, and we'll have a Q&A session with our panel towards the end. We can answer or get asked. You can ask any of your questions that you may have that come up throughout the webinar. We will also be giving a link out to our GDPR toolkit, which has an infographic with milestones of some ideas of key milestones to hit on your journey to a GDPR compliance. We have a white paper to support that, and we also have a FAQ an FAQ paper that one of our partners has produced. So my name's Andy Wall, and I'm the marketing manager here at Foursys, and we've been in business for 22 years focusing on IT security specifically. We work with 13 technology partners, and our mantra here is to really build valued relationships with our customers, and that's evident as over half of our 1,000 customers have been with us for 5 years or more. We offer a full range of cybersecurity services, from consultancy to managed support and everything in between. So before we start today, some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it's going to be placed on our YouTube channel. You guys are on listen-only mode throughout the webinar today, but you can ask questions, and there is a questions panel in your webinar panel located near the bottom. Yeah, ask your questions, and during the Q&A session we will get to them. All questions will be anonymous. And if your question is aimed at a specific panelist, then please state so. We've got, by the looks of things, over 300 people on this webinar today, so getting through all of your questions in that 10-minute slot that we have is going to likely be impossible, but please do ask them because if we don't get a chance to answer it live on the webinar, we will endeavour to come back to you within 24 hours with an answer, either via email or the panelists will give you a call if it's a more complex question. Throughout the presentations, I'll be rudely jumping in and giving our panelists a 1-minute warning during their presentation so that the webinar lasts 1 hour as advertised. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be giving out the link to our free GDPR toolkit. Right, so who is on our panel today? We have Duncan Smith. He's head of iComply, and Duncan's life is GDPR. His company, iComply, offer CAS, which is compliance as a service, and frankly he can talk about GDPR all day, but we've only given him 10 minutes to cram as much information as possible into giving you guys a view on change management. We have Toby Keane from ClearSwift. He is a key member of the ClearSwift GDPR focus team, and he helps organizations drive GDPR compliance. We have Elliot Collins from Egress, and anyone who came to our recent Don't Get Hacked seminars will be familiar with Elliot. He presented at 8 of the 10 of them that we did, and he works with numerous UK organisations to help them understand what sensitive information is leaving their networks. Apologies about that. Neil Thacker, he's joining us, and he is Deputy CISO at ForcePoint. He's got 15 years experience in the information security industry, including 10 years financial services experience in the insurance and banking arena. He is very well thought of throughout the industry and got some excellent knowledge on GDPR. And those of you who aren't familiar, he is the co-founder of Security Advisor Alliance. That's a not-for-profit organisation, and that's formed to help security leaders like yourself in their roles, and they offer advice and tools to help you guys. So if you haven't already checked that out, I urge you to do so, and yeah, we're very lucky to have him on the panel today. Okay, so that is our panel. Very experienced, a vast amount of GDPR knowledge between them, and for you guys to tap up in the next hour or so. Schedule very tight, so if this is going to be very fast pace. So I'm going to hand over to Duncan Smith from iComply, who is going to talk to you about succeeding at GDPR compliance change management. Duncan, are you there?
I am here indeed. Thank you for that, Andy. Yeah, 10 minutes to do what we normally do in a couple of days. This will be fast-paced.
I like to challenge you, Duncan. I like to challenge you. I'm just transferring the screen over to you, and I'm going to start the 10-minute timer. So over to you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks very much. So yes, good afternoon everybody. What I'm going to do just in this quick 10 minutes is give you actually a non-IT view of GDPR compliance. So what we do is we spend a lot of our time working with companies trying to make sure that they're compliant. So as a consequence of which we spend a lot of time with people not just in IT security and in IT. So this is one of the things that you're going to have to get to grips with as we start moving from where we are today to full compliance by May 2018. We're going to be running a lot of internal change teams, and there's going to be all sorts of people running around talking about Prince 2 and Agile this and Agile that and Scrums this. And what we've got to try and do is give you some idea of how IT fits in with the whole of the GDPR program, how the whole thing comes together, at least. That's the plan. So really what this is as we say, lessons from the coalface. So what we've learned, the things that we've come across as we've been running these GDPR audits with clients, how have we best achieved a smooth program, and how have we achieved the goals? In other words, how have we made sure that these guys are going to end up being compliant in however months we got left until May 2018? So how can we best achieve compliance? What are the lessons that we've learned, and what sort of nuggets of information can we give you guys? One of the best things is to remember where all this thing came from. What is it all about? It's the legislation, obviously. So I spend my entire life reading the legislation, trying to interpret this thing and trying to help organizations get to grips with what GDPR is all about. And so what I wanted to do was to get you to understand that obviously this is around personal data. This is page 1, recital 1 of the regulation. And what it says in there is that the processing of personal data should be designed to serve mankind. Yeah, so what we've got to recognize is that all this effort that we're putting into GDPR compliance, what we should be doing is thinking about the personal data that flows through the organization and what it is that we're trying to do with that data. And one of the key lessons that we've learned from running these change programs is to begin to identify the revenue generating processes and the data that flows through those processes. So what we're doing is we're saying, what process have you got in your organization? We sell pots and pans to people. Okay, well if you sell pots and pans to people, you've got some e-commerce structure working there. That e-commerce structure has some business process behind it. That business process moves personal data from the data subject all the way through until we generate a revenue at the end of it. So what we get the company to focus on is the revenue generating process that uses personal data, and then get them to recognize that all of this personal data flowing through the organization is the stuff that GDPR is involved in. So IT get to be part of that process, but it's about joining all of the individuals together in that process. So to get you to think about the sorts of things that we're talking to companies in the more holistic, in the bigger sense, let me just talk about some basic digital records of human behavior that are out there, because this is what we're talking about. The legislation is designed to protect individuals from organizations like yours and like ours from doing stuff with their data that they don't want to happen. And just one example of the sorts of controls that GDPR is putting on organizations are around these basic digital records of human behavior. This is a basic record that automatically and accurately predicts personal attributes of people, attributes which people assume to be private. So this is a simple thing that we're doing all the time in our lives that allows organizations to predict behaviors. And of course, one of the things that as an IT department, you're going to be interfacing with the other departments that use this data. So the CMO, the marketing department, the sales and marketing function. This is where a lot of the data flows through. So this diagram that's up here, this bar chart, just shows you the degree of accuracy with which I can predict some of these personal attributes just by this basic digital record of human behavior. So you can see there that to around an 88% accuracy, I can predict whether or not somebody is gay. I can predict to within an 82% accuracy whether somebody follows the Christian faith or the Islamic faith. And I can predict whether somebody is Caucasian or African American. And the basic digital record is clicking the Facebook like button. So this flow, this enormous quantity of digital information that's allowing marketing people to predict the behaviors of customers, this is the data, the personal data that this legislation is really concerned about. So as an IT department, we've got to start thinking about how do we fit into this process, how do we get people to stand up and listen to what we're talking about when all the buzz and all the jive is all about the marketing information or how we use all of this personal data that flows through the organization. So what's happening is that the way we are now starting to collect information is being more and more intrusive. And as it's more and more intrusive, we have to start thinking about how we protect that data better, and obviously that's how the regulation is designed to protect the personal data that we have. So there's a couple of screenshots here just from something as basic as your iPhone or your smartphone. So I happen to be running iOS 10 on my iPhone, and if you flick through the screens, you'll see that you can look and see what privacy or health data I'm doing in terms of my fitness tracking. As you spin through, you can then see how many flights of stairs that I've climbed, how many steps that I've done, and if you look closely on the bottom of that chart, you'll be able to see my blood pressure, because my blood pressure is recorded in there. That gives you some idea of what GDPR audit's like. And then as you scroll through these screens, you realize that the sensitivity of the data begins to increase. So unfortunately, I don't appear to have had any sexual activity recently. And this is all information that's stored on my smartphone, that is used, that is collected, that is analyzed to predict my behavior, and then is fed back to me in terms of marketing. So when I then look to see what happens on my Facebook wall, this is actually a screenshot from my personal Facebook profile, they've been trying to sell me an Airlight travel scooter. So clearly they've been looking back at my sexual activity and getting some kind of view on me and predicting me and putting me into some kind of segment which I don't want to be in. Now, this is the flow of personal data that's flowing through organizations. And when we're working on our GDPR audits, what we're trying to do is get the whole organization to come together to recognize that they need to do stuff. The problem we have with this is that not everybody understands that it's this information that is putting the organization at risk. So those screenshots that were taken from my phone, okay, they were taken a few months back, but here's something which happened just over a week ago. This was Admiral Insurance, who were trying to run a product called First Car Quote. It stumbled at the starting blocks. Basically what they were doing is asking people to download an app, and the app then connected, or you signed in through social sign-on using Facebook, and the app was then going to predict your behavior and come up with some kind of personal pricing plan for your car insurance. Well, obviously, as you can see from the two ladies there, not everything that we put on our social media profiles necessarily want to be used. We certainly put it in the public domain, but do we want people to be accessing it for something like First Car Quote? So what we have here is we have an organization that thought about all the personal data that they had available to them and then started to think about, okay, how can we use this information? They missed some really basic stuff in terms of compliance with GDPR. So here's what you've got to think about in terms of IT when you're sitting there running an IT program. We've got to start worrying about the whole flow of personal data. What is it that we're trying to do? What is it that the rest of the organization is trying to do? And how do you fit in with that process? So there is this mantra of 4 that we talk about. The mantra of 4 being collect individual level customer data, ILCD. This is what everybody wants to get a hold of, and this is the stuff that is both dangerous and gold. It's the nuclear material you have in your organization that if you don't look after carefully is going to bring GDPR crashing down on us. So we collect this individual level customer data. Why do we do that? To create insights. The insights that we create drive the sales and marketing action, and the sales and marketing action then moves the needles. So when we're running one of these GDPR programs, what we've got to recognize is that if we want people to take action, if we want people to take note, if we want budget to achieve something, we've got to recognize that we're moving the needles. And what we do is we look at this thing called the key focus, or the Facebook focus test. So Mark Zuckerberg called his employees allegedly and said, what's the #1 goal of the company? And if they couldn't answer, he hadn't made it clear. And there's another organization, SumaMe, out there, and these guys, they have one simple goal, which is to build 1 billion unique visitors for the year. So they have a simple dashboard in their office with just a number ticking up that says, this is what we're trying to achieve. Nice, simple goal. Okay, so the nice, simple goal is what everybody has to understand. So if my goal is your goal, we can all actually push each other's buttons. So when we're running these GDPR change programs, what we're trying to identify is the business process where all the data flows through, but then understand in those GDPR change meetings what are the common goals or the key performance indicators that help to break down these classic silos that we find and glue people together. So the marketing CMO will come to you and say, we need a new CRM system. And you're going to turn around to them and say, well, you can't have one of those because we don't have budget for that stuff. So what we have to recognize is GDPR helps if we think about the way the data flows through. Do we have a common goal in it? And if there isn't one, identify or create some key performance goal, which is about these shared core data processes. So if you're worried about information security and you don't have budget for doing some information security piece, just remind the chief marketing officer or the sales director that if you don't look after this data, you won't be able to use it for the sales process. In other words, your goal is my goal. So what we do is we show how compliance moves the needles left and right. And to do that, you'll need one of these things, a Millennium Falcon manual, Haynes manual. You break down a very complicated process. We spend all of our time in organizations breaking down complex processes, stringing out the way that the data flows. So we expand out every complicated part of the data process movement, and then we put the whole thing together and say, okay guys, you can now see that what we're focusing on is the important stuff and we have a shared common goal. And the quote that's on the screen there is a quote from Peter Drucker, a management guru. There is surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all. In other words, what we try to do is we try to get disparate functions like marketing and sales and IT to come together, work out what it is that's important. That's the data that drives the revenue generating process. Then we share the performance goal that measures that process, and then we get a solid GDPR change team. So okay, that's my 10 minutes just about up there, I think, Andy. So that's, like I say, a very quick run through how we're trying to glue together a GDPR change program. Obviously, on the top of all of that, we're putting a whole lot of complicated compliance stuff and compliance with the regulation and the legislation, but none of that works if nobody can be bothered to turn up to the GDPR change program meeting. Getting people to turn up to the meeting is all about sharing that common goal in terms of the core revenue generating data using business process.
Duncan,
Andy,
thank you so much. A minute or two over, but I'll let you off. Fascinating stuff. I'm sure you'll have more questions in the Q&A panel session. So I'm now going to hand over to Toby Keane, who should be on standby, and he's going to discuss driving GDPR compliance, discovering, securing, and governing with the help of ClearSwift technology.
Hi there, Andy, can you see my screen okay?
We can indeed.
Excellent, that's good. So we've done the changeover successfully. That's good start. So hi, my name is Toby Keane. I look after the channel for ClearSwift in the UK, and for the next 10 minutes I'm going to give you a view of our perspective of the GDPR regulation and attaining compliance and some of the technology that can help you achieve that. So with that in mind, one of the first things I'd like to just talk about is that this is going to happen. with everything that Duncan said and what we're going to be hearing about for the next few minutes is going to happen. The UK government confirmed at the end of October GDPR will happen with or without Brexit, so this is upon us. In May 2018 may sound like a long time ahead. It's going to get here very, very quickly. It's basically one full budget cycle to go, so having a plan is going to be absolutely essential. We need to understand how big or even how small the problem of compliance is going to be, and then align the resources and any budget required to achieve that. And needs to be done really pretty smartly, is to make sure that you have the time to complete it before May 2018, being only 18 months away. Senior executives within the organisation really should be involved and sponsor this project. They will be the ones ultimately responsible should the worst happen, so getting their sponsorship should make things happen more easily within the organisation, but also it means that there's an involvement from the top to the bottom of the organisation. The types of data that are in scope for GDPR is massively increased beyond where we are with the Data Protection Act. Things like internal data, HR, payroll, Web 2.0 kind of data, things like GPS, social media, cookies, even IP addresses have been mentioned, as well as some of the more obvious things like name, address, and PCI, payment card industry type information. But the reach is very, very broad, so it's be essential to get a handle on the kinds of data that are circulating in your organizations and maybe even leaving the organizations. So understanding where this data, any copies of it, any subsets of it actually sits in the organization is going to be a major, major task. Also, understanding the data flow around an organization is going to be a key success factor, because once you're up and running with GDPR, the process, the flow, the data flow is going to be where things may trip up. So understanding that and getting a good handle on that and containing it is going to be an essential thing. An example of that may well be you have a highly protected, centralized database with all the PII data, and that's your official location for all this information that is sensitive. But you need to understand how reports or other extracts are used, managed, and stored around the organization, as that will be a challenge too. Someone runs a report off a database, you immediately have a subset or a copy elsewhere in the organization, so managing that is going to be absolutely key. So having a detailed data discovery tool is going to be something that I would recommend you look at. In terms of some technology, GDPR, as with pretty much every regulation that's around, doesn't necessarily specify what kind of technology or any technology that you need to use, but some may be tempted to try and do this manually. I think that would be a huge overhead. I think automation is going to be key, and doing nothing, I think, will be very hard to defend once this goes live and any breach that happens. So I think there's a degree of investing in technology that helps your users and business processes achieve compliance with a minimal amount of interruption. Some areas of GDPR won't involve technology at all. As you can see on the screen, only 20% of the solution is going to be driven and solved by technology. But having that technology deliver automation and be able to inspect the data to be able to identify it, profile it, track it, trace it, is going to be absolutely key to success. So I think that data loss prevention and governance technologies will be your new best friends. So looking at the three sort of key areas, so discovery, security, and then governance. So in the first stage, data discovery is going to be a critical part of this to get a sense of the scale of the task and understand the gaps that you have and help build out your compliance plan and budget requirements. But it also will be needed to do a basic cleanup of what exists today. Having a great process go live and be your GDPR plan to go live in May 2018 is one thing. For handling future data that's created at that time and going forward is one thing, but actually being able to fix what's out there, identifying information on laptops, desktops, and servers and storage needs to be looked at, identified, and moved possibly to again keep that compliance in place. So finding the data is one thing, but also understanding that the users out there with their endpoints, their laptops, they will need to understand the processes and responsibilities of handling that data. So user education and awareness will play a big role in compliance. On the secure side, a successful GDPR project will be one where the regulations are met with a minimum disruption and impact on productivity. There's no point putting in massive amounts of technology that locks the system down so hard that no one can actually do their job. So that's a key requirement here. So our technology understands not only the content at a very granular level, but also the context. Is, my phrase on this is who is sending what to who is very important, because you'll need a different response for an email that's circulating internally, the one that may be going external to the organization. So you need to be able to understand the context as well as the content. And then you can have policies that then drive a required response. So we could modify that content on the fly to make sure it meets the criteria you set out. We could determine that that information needs to be encrypted as it leaves the organization, because again it meets a certain criteria. And we can also notify people, both recipient and sender, integrated reporting. But last of all is the ability to actually block data. So current DLP solutions typically are very much blunt instruments. They will block anything that fails to comply. We'll try and do other things first to make sure that communications continue using and leaving the stop and block mechanism consigned only to the most critical situations. So being able to react in the most appropriate way minimizes both risk and the impact of innocent and unintentional sharing of sensitive information. Removing all the unnecessary information that's in there, so metadata, all the file properties and stuff can be laden with huge amounts of information like track changes, versioning, user details, operating system and application versions, printer information, network and storage locations. All this information is typically buried in the background of these files, and the users have no idea it's there, yet it's being issued when you post stuff up to documents up to websites or sending information across email. So removing all those document properties is a key attribute here to minimize the amount of unnecessary data that's been then sent in and out of an organization. One quick story for you about metadata, how it gets you into trouble. A prison had a process in place where when a prisoner was released, they would send out an email to a handful of recipients with some information about that prisoner. They would take the information from a spreadsheet, drop it into a PDF, and send the email out. And they did that for a number of years, and then one person happened to open up that PDF file and clicked on the table, which had actually come from a pivot table within the spreadsheet, and actually, lo and behold, the entire spreadsheet information was sitting behind that pivot table and was visible to that recipient, and they could see all the prisoners, how long they had to serve, home address, next of kin details, and so on and so forth. A big, big problem for them. They got fined £90,000 for that one breach, and that was doubled because they've been doing it for a number of years, and that's under the current regulation. As you all know, that the fines under GDPR are massively escalated above that. So,
Toby, just your 1 minute warning. Sorry to interrupt.
1 minute warning. Thank you very much, Andy. So just to move on to the last part here on information governance, a key aspect of a successful GDPR project is putting control into those who own the information. They're the ones who understand the importance and the sensitivity and who maybe should either be able to send or receive it. And typically this has historically been landed with IT because they manage the systems, but they shouldn't really, and from what the conversations I've had, don't really want the responsibility of determining who and what should be sent to whom. The track and trace capability will assist in understanding whether that information has been shared to outsourced processors. And as we've mentioned, the critical part of GDPR is knowing and controlling who and what has gone to third parties, as that responsibility lies with the data owners, not necessarily the data processors. So just to wrap up, hopefully I've been able to show you in that very, very quick 10 minutes an insight into technology that's available to help you get not only underway with GDPR, but put in place a low business impact set of controls to achieve and maintain compliance. And these capabilities, they actually bring immediate business value and protection over and above GDPR. You don't have to wait until May 2018 to see enhanced security, and it's delivered in the most suitable way for your organization in enhancing your existing systems and can be delivered either on-premise or in the cloud. Thank you very much for your time.
Toby, thank you. Great stuff. We're going to try and pass over to Elliot now, who is going to be talking decrypting GDPR with encryption. So Elliot, if you're there.
Perfect, thanks Andy. Can I just check you can see my screen that side, yep?
We can indeed.
Okay, perfect. Afternoon everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how data security tools can be used to help your organisation become EU GDPR compliant. Now EU GDPR gives new urgency and significance to our problems. The problem we solve at Egress is how to secure the sensitive data that your organisation holds, shares and processes. We know that data is vulnerable when shared via email, file transfer, online collaboration or even web forms, but these processes are essential to many organisations' functions. So initially what I'm going to do is highlight 3 areas where EU GDPR requires us to consider the approach we take to sharing data. So the first part to this is understanding your data. Under Article 9 it states that organisations need to know what personal data they hold. Now you can use existing technologies like data classification to support this. By identifying the personal data you hold, you're able to treat it separately from the other data held in your systems, and from this you can apply different policies around what you can and can't do with this information. PII data can be classified at a higher level of sensitivity. Now once you know what data it is you hold, you will be required to secure that data. We can see from Article 32, Section 1A, that identifies encryption as appropriate technology for protecting personal data. Now encryption technologies already exist to support this, but encrypting alone does not meet sophisticated organisational challenges. We strongly encourage the organisations we work with to adopt a solution that provides additional features that combat human error and empower your users. Key things to consider within this are actually adopting those solutions that your end users can efficiently work with, and using policies and automatic encryption to reduce the risk of an accidental breach. Finally, it's ensuring you have the ability to search, index and correlate encrypted and personal data. The third and final part will be the ability to report on your data. It's been stated that auditing activity relating to personal data is a critical aspect of GDPR. So this is having that ability to track who has access to what, why and for how long. This piece is covered in Article 30 that says organisations must keep detailed records of the processing conducted on any piece of personal data. And it further states in Article 83 that good record keeping will be considered as a mitigating circumstances in the case of a data breach, and this will be to reduce or avoid a fine altogether. Auditing and reporting will be hugely important when GDPR comes in. It's key that you shouldn't invest in solutions that just secure data but leave you unable to understand how that data is used. Now I want to look at how we can make this possible. We need solutions that fit modern working practice and the complex IT systems in place. We tend to find from our customer base that classification, DLP and encryption being used in isolation may have a limited success at mitigating a data breach under GDPR. To improve results we actually need improved integration. So having security tools that deliver that range of functionality, covering all points of the journey that data goes through, from creation, control release, all the way through to protection in transit at rest. But alongside this, actually having system intelligence that helps end users avoid mistakes and works alongside user trends to build policies and help compliance officers address potential threats within the organisation. This is the approach that Egress have taken in developing and expanding our encryption platform, and we see data sharing as a life cycle. So from that point of creation to sharing information internally with colleagues or externally with clients and third parties, we know that every piece of information needs an appropriate level of security applied to it. Features you tend to use when sharing any piece of information can be seen here: your rule-based DLP, your encryption, giving that customizable authentication and rights management, but also the auditing behind the software itself. And we've aligned our solutions alongside this based on the different ways that information can actually be shared. So first of all, tools for secure email and secure file transfer, giving users the ability to safely and securely share information internally or externally. But also collaboration tools is a different form of communicating, having multiple different users working on one specific piece of information and getting rid of the use of the likes of Dropbox within the organisation. Or even if it's bulk pieces of information being shared from one site to another on an automated basis or shared to a number of your clients on a weekly, monthly, annually basis. But taking that holistic approach to information sharing is taking that step back and understanding what information it is that you actually hold for your organisation. So what's deemed as sensitive that needs to be shared? Do you have protective marking and unique document fingerprinting on every email and document within the network? So there's tools that allow you to do that, email and document classification, actually understanding what it is you hold. And then finally, to tie it all together, is really drilling down on that compliance reporting and real-time analysis. So all of this information that's being shared internally and externally, having the tools available to securely store that in an email and file archive, but also run detailed reports on exactly what's happening with this information. And when you actually tie that back to that data sharing lifecycle, you can see that we are able to cover every part of the journey from data being shared internally and externally. And then we can use the analysis and reporting to tie those intelligent policies back into the software itself. So if, for example, I was sharing sensitive documents with one of our clients or third parties and I copy someone into that who's not privy to that information, it can apply policies based on that, such as rules around access rights, prompting the user to say, this person isn't privy to that information, are you sure you still want to send this? Or even locking information and applying rules based on specific untrusted or unfamiliar IP addresses. So what I'm going to show you, and this will be very quick just to show you how simple it actually is to implement these tools, if I just switch over to show you a quick demonstration of our secure email and file transfer tool here. Now, the email and file transfer piece offers full integration with 365, Google Apps, Outlook, Client, which I'm going to quickly show you here. You'll see when I select a new email, the user has a number of added extensions at the top left-hand side. First of all, I can apply any time limitations on time-sensitive documents we're sending. I can attach large files from the email itself, or I can select this option here, which applies different policies to this email that we're sharing. Now, by default, not all information is going to be secured on exit, but as the user, I can select to encrypt the information internally, encrypt it externally, or encrypt any message body and attachments and apply read-only access. So the recipient won't be able to forward, download, save any of the message body and attachments there. But this is what it looks like for the user making a choice. So we have policies that can automatically encrypt information, again, to specific domains, IP addresses. We can blacklist and whitelist accounts. But we can also put educational tools in to get users in the general trends of sharing sensitive information securely. So we'll see here this is classified as no encryption by default. When I send this as the user, we can say I'm given a prompt because the software scanned the attachment and says sensitive information has been detected. You need to apply a level of encryption on there. Now that's all completely customizable, but what I will show you is a number of different ways the information can be accessed. This is the most popular option, the zero footprint web client. I'm just going to pop this, scroll down here. This would be completely customized to an organization's color scheme, logos, text. But you see when I read this secure email online, I'm simply prompted to sign in with my Egress Switch ID. I'm already signed up, so I'm simply going to sign in there. And we can see I'm given access to the email itself, and from this I can reply or initiate communication back. Now, I didn't actually send an email with that secret policy applied, but to show everyone what that looks like on here, you can see it looks identical to before, but we've actually changed the authentication here, so I'm faced with a disclaimer that I'll have to accept to access this information. Once accepted, I can enter a unique two-factor authentication password, which can be anything from a national insurance number to a code that's text to my phone. But we'll see that when I actually pop that unique password in. I'm given access to the information there, and we've got that read-only access. So this can be used for the more sensitive information we're sharing. We can see I can't do anything with this. We've got watermarks across it, and if I click out of this, try and access a snipping tool, we simply blur it and render it grey in the web browser there. So it's nice and simple, not only for your users internally, but the recipients externally when accessing information. And because we encrypt all of the information at rest, you have lifetime control over any piece of information you send. So by clicking that Send Packages plugin, we can see a detailed list of audit results for every single piece of information we've shared. So if I was to go ahead and look at that egress patent that I've just opened as such there, we can see that even after this has left the organisation, I am still able to apply time restrictions, change that classification if I feel I no longer trust this user, so I'm going to put that read-only access on there. But the biggest security benefit here is the ability to get information back. By clicking revoke there, we'll see we've got a small red cross as such, and when I try to access this patent again, it's simply not going to release the encryption key for this individual user. I'll just double check that in there again. Just check that was the right one, yeah. It's going to tell me that access to this message is denied because it has been revoked. So that is essentially your golden bullet and your lifesaver when sharing information. But when tying this into EU GDPR security and compliance, we can see that point by point we have a detailed audit log of exactly what's happened with this file so far. So we can see I've been quite busy with it today, and I can see exactly not only what's happening but where this is happening. So if I select this option here, we have the client that was used to access that information as well as the location via the IP address. Now this is what it looks like for an individual user, but using this technology you will have a central administration panel where you have control of every single piece of information that leaves the organisation, that comes into the organisation, and that will be lifetime control where the information is encrypted at rest. We can see here actually from an email I've just been sent on my Switch Secure archive, I'm getting a weekly summary of exactly what's happening with our quad DLP policies, what matches we're receiving, even drilling it down to the attachments, the senders, the recipients. I mean, this is quite a detailed log here.
Elliot, sorry to interrupt. If you've got 1 minute to finish, that'd be great.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Andy. So we can see here, this is just a simple example of an email that's been sent to me, which is giving me update reports on my business account. But it's all customizable, so we work with organisations to tie this in to their internal policies and procedures and align our security policies alongside that. So the key thing to note here is with the changes to EU GDPR and having that ability to track any piece of information is key. That's me finished up for the demonstration itself. So again, we'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of the demonstration, and by all means there's more information that can be downloaded on this area on our website. Alternatively, we're happy to run more in-depth conversations with Foursys.
Elliot, thank you ever so much. That was great stuff. Egress really do offer a market-leading encryption solution. So last but no means least, we have Neil Thacker. He is from ForcePoint, and he's going to have 10 minutes to look at Article 33 and 17, a couple of articles that Team IT really need to pay attention to and will be heavily involved in getting your organisation compliant. So Neil, are you there?
Yes, hi Andy.
Hi Neil, so we can see your screen and you're good to go.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I think that promise you made at the beginning that if anybody runs over, they're going to be issued a 4% fine actually works, so that's good. I'm going to try and stick to time. This is why I specifically pulled out 2 articles that are perhaps most pressing for organisations, especially IT teams, and the kind of link between the organisational and technical countermeasures that are needed. So, so thank you. Yeah. So first off, I'm going to be talking about, as every other vendor, we have again some introductions, some assets that can be accessed in terms of our understanding of what GDPR means and how that relates to our technology. In terms of a starting point, what we're kind of looking at is understanding kind of the business processes, the business enablement as part of this. We see GDPR again as a key to enabling businesses today. In terms of linking organizational and technical controls, we're now seeing this convergence across these 2 areas. Data protection governance and the structure around this is becoming quite critical. My role at Forcepoint, I'm also involved as part of this. I'm part of the kind of the GDPR stakeholder group. So we're obviously progressing with kind of our compliance with this area also. Some of the other areas that perhaps have already been covered today, but I'd like to go over in terms of those two articles are, of course, understanding where your personal data resides, that PII records. So we're also looking at, again, how we issue notices, how we gain consent, purpose, defined, etc., from the relevant EU citizens themselves. And of course, going through this and understanding that the process needs to be managed. Of course, again, very generic statement by the kind of the EU GDPR talking about the implementation of technical and organizational controls. From our perspective, we're also looking at how organizations are performing data protection impact assessments and how this relates to IT. Typically, when a new IT system goes in place, there needs to be a data protection impact assessment if it's being used to process PII records. And then finally, of course, perhaps the one that keeps most CISOs awake at night is, again, the requirement to notify the relevant authorities of, again, a personal data breach. Now, the interesting thing is we've witnessed across the EU, there's one country in particular, the Netherlands, that have already implemented part of GDPR as part of their national law. Now, they've put in place from January 2016, so they've had a whole year of getting ready and, again, adhering to the standard of notifying the authorities of a data breach, and they've had to do it within 72 hours. They've already, from what we've seen, the Dutch Data Protection Authority has already received over 4,000 notifications of a personal data breach affecting organizations that process or control PII records in the Netherlands. And over 50% of government agencies have reported a data breach in the Netherlands. So we're expecting post-2018 this to be a serious area of, again, reporting data breach notifications going directly to the relevant supervisory authority. So again, gearing up, getting prepared for that data breach notification workflow is as important as anything else there. In terms of what we're seeing, in terms of what the ICO, so the UK Supervisory Authority, we've seen that obviously looked at their reports for this year, highlighted that the majority of incidents that have been reported to them that relate to data security incidents are because of, again, mistakes being made by employees. So potentially incorrect recipients sent as a destination, so an email, perhaps uploading documents to, again, an unauthorized or untrusted destination. One other area is redacting content, employees doing a poor job of redacting content. We've seen examples of employees in other organizations using wingdings, etc., to kind of mask and anonymize data. We know that doesn't work. And of course, general other Principle 7 failures. So we have had over 500 investigations performed by the ICO this year, highlighting, again, perhaps poor security practices relating to data protection. In terms of the cyber incidents, which they have as a new category, again, another area of perhaps, again, in some cases, accidental or negligent data leakage through poor misconfiguration of security technologies as well as IT systems. The compromise of systems, again, through to data exfiltration by threat actors, etc. Phishing is one that the ICO call out, and the other area is general weak controls put in place, so failure to use HTTPS and encryption techniques to protect that data. So in terms of how we're helping organizations looking at their strategy, we're obviously highlighting areas that they should be already considering, perhaps against key stakeholders in their organization, and this should be the strategy for most organizations, very similar to the Foursys timeline. So again, having a DPO involved at the early stages, going through your controller and processor responsibilities, and making sure you have your PII discovered, understanding where that data resides, both, again, at rest, in motion, and during use also. In terms of kind of the last 12 months, so from May 2017, it's performing that data flow mapping exercise, consider kind of internal and external processing tasks, reviewing the contract reviews with your third parties, making sure they've put in the right level of control to be considered appropriate for GDPR, and then finally, again, having a handle on performing those data protection impact assessments to ensure your systems are not leaking data without your knowledge. And then finally, all the way up to the 25th of May 2018, of course, going through mapping and listing your technical and organizational controls, looking for gaps in those controls, testing your incident response plan, making sure that you can report a data breach within 72 hours once you've been able to identify you've had a breach, And then, of course, testing your ability to, again, receive requests from an EU citizen to erase their data, to make their data portable, and obviously deal with subject access requests, and again, reviewing that consent program also. So these are the kind of three key milestones, really, to consider before GDPR, before that 25th May 2018. So in terms of how Forcepoint can help, one area that I'm going to be focusing on, I actually showed, we have, again, a good friend of mine, Rosemary J, senior attorney at Hunton & Williams, showcasing how typically we identify data leakage incidents and also how we find data across, again, a large ecosystem. So initially, this is the Forcepoint DLP technology, so highlighting kind of where the data resides. So first up, looking at specific locations. So here we've just run a simple discovery task looking for PII data, and again, this is the list of items that's come back. Again, we can be very specific in which folders we search. We can be very pervasive, also looking at cloud applications, endpoint controls, and again, across existing legacy networks also. Once you find the location of the data, we can go through and look at the file properties. So perhaps when it was at last accessed, when it was last modified, who actually modified that, and we can actually see the owner of that data. We can also look at specific file permissions, and of course if you've got everyone access to a certain folder with PII data in, then obviously not considered appropriate security. So we can actually look at the file permissions as part of that also. We can also start looking and applying certain types of techniques such as machine learning. We can actually highlight this as a positive incident that may have occurred, and it will go and find similar types of data, similar types of records, and helps you identify where that data resides. Again, not just specific to policies. The idea with our technology, it will learn over time. And then finally, of course, once we find an incident, we can start managing that incident, and that could be through workflow. We could assign an action to our data protection officer if, for instance, it's a case of reporting an incident to the ICO or the relevant supervisory authority. We can also then start remediating that, so looking at encryption, even in cases of pseudo-anonymization, etc. And we can also escalate incidents as well, so we can track and manage the security incident from start to finish, and obviously make sure that we're reporting all of this within that 72 hours. In terms of looking at, again, specific data leakage incidents, the previous one was looking at items around data discovery, and if you receive a request for perhaps the right to erasure, looking for data within structured and unstructured file types. We can then start looking at technical controls and obviously looking at data breach notification requests as well. So here we can start looking at specifically where the data started from, the source of this. Again, this example looking at email. Of course, this can be over web. This could be over a cloud application also. This could be looking at specific synchronization within cloud applications. And we can then start looking at, again, where it's destined to. And obviously, as part of this, we can start looking at specific geolocation, where the data resides. We can also start looking quite closely at the data forensics at this point. One area that we really focus on is looking at, again, the idea of managing this incident. So looking at the number of records, again, there's a specific requirement as part of GDPR to report the number of incidents that have occurred, how many records were potentially leaked from the organization. And of course, we can do that through this technology. And of course, we can set actions as part of this. We can look to quarantine. We can obviously permit with approval, much similar to the previous presentation. We can do that through this technology today. We also have the ability to score this risk. So as part of GDPR, you may set a higher threshold, a higher risk score to any type of PII data movement around an organization. And we can drill down and look at specific risk scores, certain individuals that are potentially causing this type of security incident. And again, start investigating other activity that may have been formed. Are they a compromised user? Again, in some cases, is it negligence? Is it because they don't have the right level of training? Or again, is it accidental data leakage? We can do that through our incident risk ranking technology. And with that, I think that's, hopefully I've not gone over. I don't want to face that 4% fine. With that, if you have any other questions, again, you can feel free to email me or again, reach out to me either through direct through Forcepoint or through Foursys.
Now, thank you so much. Now you were right on cue and didn't need the 1 minute warning. So thank you for that. I'm going to now open up the floor for our Q&A session. Thank you to our panelists. I hope you agree with me that some excellent bits of information and nuggets there for Team IT. Some questions have been coming in during the presentations, so I'm going to kick off with those. And Neil, while I've got you on the line, I'm going to come to you. Just a reminder to the participants, any questions, please fire away. We are running 5 minutes over, so hopefully you can stand by for those extra 5 minutes while we go through these questions as quick as possible. And that goes with the panel as well. If you can answer as quick as possible, that would be brilliant, so we can get through as many questions in the 10 minutes. Right. Neil, will Brexit have an effect on the UK's use of GDPR?
No. So it's already been agreed that the UK will take on GDPR. We'll still be part of the EU from May 2018, we expect anyway, unless something changes anytime soon. So we'll still be part of that. And again, it's been agreed that the UK will take that law and make it their own. So yes, be prepared for GDPR if you're a UK-based organisation and only deal with UK citizen information.
Brilliant, thank you. Duncan, coming to you next. I don't have the budget to do all of this compliance work. Where's the money coming from?
Who's got the money? Actually, well, ultimately as an organisation you have to do something. So there's budget from an organisational perspective. Otherwise you take the rather challenging business risk that says we're not going to comply, but we will risk the non-compliance. And obviously for any organisation that's looking out there to protect its reputation and the data, you are going to look to comply. So the question then is, from what budget can you get that money? And it's not always the IT budget that has to collect all of this information. So some of the examples that the panelists were giving there in terms of their products and their solutions, if they were to be purchased by an organisation, we would have to look to see what revenue generating process is impacted if you lost all of that information. So if you rely on the ability to transfer data, for example, securely between your customers and your clients, if you're unable to do that, you'll find that it's very difficult to sell your product and service, because your customers turn around to you and say, we can't buy you unless you can provide us, for example, with a secure email solution or a secure solution for transferring this data backwards and forwards. So what the team IT needs to do is identify who in the organization this has the most impact on in terms of revenue, and then explain to them in terms of GDPR that there's a very good chance that this process will fall down and that your customers ultimately will ask you to comply, and if you don't comply, your competitors will. So there's a whole bunch of wheezes and buttons to push, but you can see there I'm pushing the we might like lose business button. It's not just my problem, it's your problem as well. So use all of those ducks and dives and tools and techniques to try and drive budget out of other departments and other areas, and not just the IT budget.
Brilliant. And sticking with you, Duncan, what are the implications of GDPR in relation to the IP bill passed by the House of Lords last week? Does it just increase complications for ISPs and telcos?
So the IP bill, sorry, which one was that? Do we know what that is? Or I'm just, in terms of the IP address, in terms of identifying whether it's personal data or not, or was that intellectual property?
Good question. Doesn't state here.
Okay.
But maybe the person who asked that question can expand on that, and we can come back to it.
Sure.
Toby, I'll shoot over to you for this one. What information or data types do I have to be able to protect?
So, as I mentioned in my session, it really comes down to anything that can be linked back to an individual. It's vast ranging, it's fairly open by its intention, so as new data types become prevalent, then it will capture those as well. So it doesn't specify specific file types or information types, but basically the principle is if it can be linked back to an individual, then it needs to be managed by GDPR.
Brilliant. Elliot, if you're there, how is the end-to-end encryption you describe compared to TLS? And is TLS not compliant with EU GDPR?
Yeah, I mean, TLS is the method encryption of encrypting information from A to B. The main difference with what we offer is that unlike TLS, emails can be tracked and audited in the same detail, so you don't get the rich data of who, what, where and when, which is essential to demonstrating how that data was processed. TLS, I mean, it doesn't have that sophisticated important business features like classification, rights management, and DLP policies. With regards to compliance with EU GDPR, I mean, TLS secures data in a way that could be considered as appropriate under GDPR technology, but it wouldn't support the auditing that is crucial, as we saw in the presentation. Therefore, it's not really a complete response to the challenges we see with GDPR.
Brilliant, thank you. Neil, got a couple for you here. How does the GDPR differ from the Data Protection Act?
Okay, the core principles are very similar. However, there are of course some major changes. The one is, I guess one key area is around that the processors, data processors, are also now accountable. So if you're a data processor, not necessarily a controller, you also can be fined. Sanctions can be issued against you. So all of this is relevant to both controller and data processor. Of course, I think we mentioned the fines already. Fines of 2%. Or 4%, depending on the kind of the issue that is identified as part of that. 2% typically if you're not securing the data, 4% if you're profiling or over-processing the data. So of course, and that's 2% of your worldwide revenues, or 10 million euros, whichever is higher, or 4%, or 20 million euros. Whichever is higher. So actually going back to the point around I don't have budget for this, most organizations now have this on their risk register, and actually when you start considering scoring risk based around certain types of incidents such as data leakage or information leakage, what you're now seeing is that organizations it's in their top 5 in terms of risk register items, because of the value of the data and typically the value of the fine as well. So those are kind of the basics. Again, reporting data breaches wasn't part of the Data Protection Act, but is part of GDPR. There is actually a great guide, and sorry to say this, but there's a great guide from Hunton and Williams that talks about what was in the original UK Data Protection Act, how GDPR differs.
No, brilliant. Please fire away any relevant, useful resources for the attendees. One for the floor, I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but how does this affect backup data? Who wants to take that question?
There's a couple of things that are coming out about backup data that's very relevant when we've been auditing companies. Is this whole idea of data sovereignty, which is kind of GDPR, but it has its own life outside of GDPR, which is the idea that information about individuals, personal, PII. I think Belgium has just got one, Russia has it, Germany has it, I think Australia has just issued a data sovereignty bill or a legislation. So we're going to have to start thinking very carefully about where backups actually exist, or any cloud service for that matter. And ridiculously, or rather challengingly, we're going to have to make sure that in certain instances PII stays within the territory of that particular resident. So that's going to be quite a challenge for both the likes of the cloud and the backup companies, the cloud service providers, but also the rest of us trying to understand where our data has ultimately gone.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just looking through some more questions here. Got the DPO role tends to be part of another role such as information governance and compliance, etc. Will this continue, or is the exception that this will be a standalone specialist role?
So no, it doesn't have to be. It's something that typically, as long as you have somebody in your organisation that is appointed as a DPO, and then that's sufficient. In my experience, generally, it's somebody in the legal department, somebody that has an understanding of the law itself and can put that into progress. But typically, again, it's not a full-time role, depending on the size of the organisation, etc. So, of course, there's also some conditions around the role itself, that it is a protected role, and that typically you have to report into typically the CEO in most organisations. So again, that's another area around DPO, the actual DPO role itself. Okay, brilliant. Guys, we are out of time. I'm very keen to stick to what we're saying, the hour-long webinar. There is some unanswered questions, and I appreciate we didn't manage to answer the first question. So I will get a response from the panelists regarding that IP bill, and I will email that to you as well. Before we leave, as
promised, here's the links to our resources that support this webinar. I'm going to leave this up on the screen so you can take a note. Foursys.co.uk/downloads/GDPR.zip. As just mentioned, I'll be emailing you with this link. I will also email you the YouTube video so you can pass it on to any colleagues or re-watch, as well as the slides. So chaps, if you could email me your presentations, I'll zip that up and send to the attendees. So unfortunately we're out of time. If you did ask a question, I'm sorry we didn't get to it. We will get an answer to you within the next 24 hours. If you want to speak to any of our panelists or view the technology a bit further, obviously we were very rushed with the 10 minutes. Please get in contact with myself. Contact details on the screen. We can do that, or indeed your Foursys account manager. All right, so I hope you found that beneficial. Thank you again to our panelists for taking the time to be with us, and for everyone attending, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Cheers.